So we're usually taught that Abraham was chosen, right? This is what the sages tell us, the story we're told, that Abraham was chosen because it comes out of nowhere, right? We're told that he goes to the land of God comes to him and tells him, go to the land of Canaan. And it sort of comes across that Abraham is someone that God keeps, checking again and again. And he passes with flying colors. He's the ultimate believer. So I'd like to propose that Abraham could not be further away from that. I'd like to propose that the reason, and we're going to look at the verses, the reason God chooses Abraham is for one simple reason. There was the flood. No one's behaving the way they should. Even Noach and his sons, ultimately things don't continue the way they were. God is looking for a good person, a person of chesed, a person that's going, he's a straight shooter, he does what you're supposed to do. He's looking for a mensch, and I think he finds this in Abraham. And what we're going to see is that God chooses Abraham consciously because he's a mensch, because he's a man of chesed in a world that is full of gvura, full of, stern judgment, people misbehaving. And it actually takes Avraham a long time to become, move from skeptical believer to believer and doing something perhaps not that he's interested in doing, but understanding it's what he must do. So let's see how it starts. The Torah portion begins, the famous, God comes to Abraham and says, go where you got to go. And, those that are going to curse you, I'll curse them. Those that bless you, I'll bless you. Everything's going to be amazing. I'm going to take you to a given land. And then notice how the text tells us, and Abraham went as God spoke. That doesn't mean that Abraham listened to God. That just means narrator is telling us, guess what? Abraham, some internal voice, someone said to him something, and Abraham happened to do that. That doesn't mean Abraham chose to do it for that reason. And we're going to see why this reading actually makes sense. So then we're told that, they leave, he takes Sarai, he takes everything from Haran, and of course, he makes he builds an altar for God because he's a guy of chesed, he's a good guy. He had some vision told him, you're going to have good stuff. So he builds an altar, why not? It can't hurt. Okay, God basically has told him at this point, not only am I going to bless you, meaning I have your back, but also this land, Canaan, is your land. Those are two things God has told him, God's promised him. And then we're told there was famine. Now, if you're a believer and there's famine, what do? God's got you back. You don't go anywhere. God's told you this is your land. What does Abraham do? He goes down to Egypt. Not only does he leave, and I'm not saying this is because Abraham's bad. He's just acting like a human being. He goes down to Egypt, and he also tells his wife Sarah to lie to Pharaoh because he doesn't believe God has his back. If he believed God had his back, why would he tell Sarah to say that she's his sister and this whole scheme? And notice also that when Pharaoh comes and says to Avraham, why did you bring this upon me? Pharaoh doesn't disclose that it was God that spoke to him, meaning God's here everywhere, but Abraham doesn't seem to get it. And if you keep reading the verses, we continue to find that no matter what happens, it's God that keeps reappearing to Abraham. And Abraham doesn't seem to be taken too much by it. In fact, it's only when we get to just before the Shishi, to sort of towards the end of Lech Lecha, where God appears again. And for the first time, we're already midway Lech Lecha, we are told, and Abraham believed. He believed. Oh, finally he believes. And yet what's the second thing that happens after he says he believes? He says to him, but how am I going to know? Like he still has doubts. And by the way, right after he says, I believe, God says to him, I'm the one that took you out of Ur Kasdim. Why does God have to tell Abraham that he's the one that took him out? Because he doesn't buy that story. He thinks it was him, his family, they just left. And so this whole Torah portion can be read in a way, and forgive me for this radical view, that Abraham is not the believer we've been taught. Abraham is a great guy, he does chesed with everyone. God has chosen him for that reason. And Abraham is a skeptic. He finds it difficult in this world we live in to see a God. And yet at the end, God then tells him, your offspring are going to go down to Egypt for 400 years. Meaning there are ramifications. I've chosen you. You didn't believe. Now your offspring are going to suffer. Plus the fact that God changes his name, adds a hey, and changes his wife's name. Meaning God has not only told him, look, this is the way it's going to go whether you like it or not. And he's changed his name. He's changed something internal in him. And at this point only, towards the end of the Torah portion, Abraham then, right, and God tells him about circumcision, he circumcises his entire household. It's at this point that Abraham understands to believe does not necessarily mean to believe. It means that this is something that you have, it is your conviction to follow, for better or for worse. And this is simply a very different way of reading Lech Lecha. Try it. Shabbat Shalom.